Hello, everybody. I'm Erica Lukes, and this is UFO Classified right here on Friday night. I'm happy to report that I've had a wonderful week, and I hope some of you guys got to see the magnificent northern lights, the aurora borealis. I am right here in Salt Lake, and I've got a lot of light pollution around, and I was amazed that I could walk outside and see the absolutely stunning display. It really was cool. And then, of course, I had to drag in, the neighboring business and the guy riding his bike down the street. And I think clearly quite a few people thought that I might need some medication, but I was having a good time. So, what do you do? But I am happy to be here. And I wanted to say hello, Jim. Good morning. Thanks so much for staying up late with us. And I want to thank all of my friends for supporting UFO Classified, my work over the years, and now more importantly, the work of Expanding Frontiers Research. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out everything that we do. Jack and I have been busy, as you can imagine. We're always doing things behind the scenes, so make sure you check it out. So hello, you guys. Nice to see you in chat. And now I'm going to bring my partner in crime, the most patient man on the planet, Jack Brewer. How are you?
I am good. How are you, Erica?
I'm pretty groovy. I am very good. But without further ado, we are going to bring our two fabulous guests on tonight. So Adam Gorightly, and we have got Chris Graybill. And excuse me, I'm a little sing-songy tonight, so you just have to think I need to go sing some little Cats or West Side Story or something, so don't mind me. I'm just in a really, really good mood. So I'm excited for the show tonight, and thanks you, both of you, because you've got a big premiere coming out. And I'm very privileged to be a part of it. And so I am going to just give you guys a little introduction, as if either of you need an introduction. But Adam Gorightly is kind of a Renaissance man. He has been kind of looking at he has been looking at conspiracies, parapolitics, a lot of different things for many years. And he has done digging into things that both Jack and I approve of and encourage, and we learn from. And we are really excited to have him here. He's written many different books over the years, and you've got his bio here on YouTube, so make sure you check it out. We've also got links, and then we've got Christopher Graybill, who had Beavis and Butthead. I've got to talk to you about this, Christopher, because I've just been like, are you freaking kidding me? Beavis and Butthead. But you're an animator, a filmmaker. You live in LA. You worked on a number of film projects. Birds of Prey in 2020. Dave Made a Maze, 2017. The Death of Superman. What Happened? And then, like I said, Beavis and Butthead, X-Men, 97. And now Saucers, Kooks, and Spooks, which is going to be coming where? And where can we look for this? Because I've got friends who are dying to know where to find it.
Man. Right now, that's still being worked out, but
Cool.
It's going to be fairly soon, hopefully.
Oh, are you guys just like relieved and excited?
Yeah, super excited to get this thing into the world. It's been too long, as you know.
I was trying to remember when we started this, Chris.
Well,
when did you first
to read the book in like 2021, and then we filmed, then we filmed that May in 2021, I believe.
That is crazy. That's a long time.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah, it's too long.
But when you have such a good project and you're going around like all over the country and interviewing people and putting together things, and then, as all of you guys know, things evolve so quickly with this subject, or they just feel like they're in 1 year constantly, the same year, going over MJ12 and all these different things. But first of all, tell us how you guys got together and paired up.
Well, I was going to make a completely different UFO movie. It was going to be like super conspiratorial and just like get in all the Nazis and just all the crazy stuff. And then I read a bunch of recent books at the time. I read the Greys Have Been Framed, and a friend of mine recommended Adam's book, and I read that. And I had just found a whole bunch of Japanese documentaries that were, it was just like a mirror to Adam's book, like all the characters from these films, like Bill Moore and Linda Howe and just all of the old players. So I contacted Adam and we started working on it.
And so, Adam, what did you think? when Chris called you?
Well, it was
Put you on
kind
the
of
spot
odd.
here.
He was able to find me on Facebook. I have an author page there that I never pay attention to. So he left a message there. And with these stupid author pages, they're hooked up to like Facebook's AI program. So the AI started talking to Chris and asked him who you were, give me a little background. And
Yeah,
I
I was
finally got
talking
in
to
there.
the
And
AI. I remember that, thinking it was you, and I'm like, oh, this guy's kind of like a robot.
Oh, my
Anyway,
Lord.
Chris gave me some background. He had mentioned he was working on a film about Cambridge Analytica at one point, So okay, this guy sounds interesting. I don't know what became of that, but so yeah, we just started talking, had some conversation. I felt comfortable with it, so we moved forward and
Wow,
started
that's fun.
interviewing a bunch of people. I came up with, the book was the basic platform outline, and okay, who appears in the book is somebody that's around that we could still interview, and came up with a dozen or so people and started going for it. And as it evolved over time, we ended up with a ton of material. We were kicking around doing even a 4-part series, but that didn't pan out for a lot of different numbers of reasons. So there's extra material we have as well that beyond the film that we plan to use in other formats, perhaps a podcast or something of that nature. Coming soon.
Wow. All right. I mean, that must have been fun because both of you have, similar backgrounds, but you could lend, I would just kind of bounce ideas off of each other and then create something really, really cool. And Chris, I've got to go back to, you said Cambridge Analytica, and my
Yeah.
ears kind of pop up there because, a lot of the same characters, Steve Bannon and the crew, they've all been skirting
Yeah.
around or are directly involved in the UFO topic and some of the people in the subject right now. And so what have you found, and do you think that there is any interlap between Cambridge Analytica and some of the shenanigans in the UFO world?
Oh, wow. I never thought about that, but I'm sure. I mean, is it still a company even? I think it was kind of subsumed into
Yeah.
the military industrial complex somehow. That's how I ended the movie, because that's where it was at the time, I think. But
yeah, they definitely changed their name at some point because whoever the head of Cambridge Analytica got caught on tape saying some embarrassing stuff. I forget all the particulars now, but oops, I disappeared on you.
All right. Live cam action.
They definitely got rid of the Cambridge Analytica branding, but they moved on somewhere else. They had a lot of information there and they were doing a lot of things. So that tool is still out there for somebody's using.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
I just never looked into anything about the the crossover with UFOs and that world, but yeah, it's a spooky one for sure. So that's got to be some general crossover, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to me, not to go too far afield with this, but it's the way I roll. Jack knows he has to rein me back in sometimes, which can be difficult depending on how spicy I'm feeling. But I look at Coast to Coast, and I see the players that have been on late night paranormal radio for 20, 30 years, whatever. And you've got the same, here we've got, George Norrie and his kind of far right, whatever he's doing over here, and then promoting colloidal silver. And then you've got, we're bringing in people to talk about the paranormal, but then we're bringing in Oliver Stone, or no, excuse me, not Oliver Stone, but Roger Stone. And then we're bringing on Steve Bannon, and we're bringing on some of these people that definitely had a vested interest, specifically Steve Bannon, kind of mining data to figure out what fuels people. And I think right now in the UFO community, we're seeing that quite a bit, probably more so than usual. Setting up these Facebook groups and then mining data or pushing out information that people, I don't know, these people want us to believe. So anyway, that is me, and I will now bring it back to center. So Jack.
Jack, you got to see the film?
I did. Thank you for letting me get a preview of it. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work that went into it. I appreciate the finished product. I think we are on center here, Erica, with what you're talking about, along with the film. I think a recurring theme tonight with our discussion will be it's important to look back and see what historically took place because it gives us insight into what's happening today, what's going on with intelligence agencies, what's going on with UFO organizations, what's going on with self described whistleblowers, and so on. And equally as importantly, if we can trace these narratives back to their origins, and even if not the origin, the people that promoted them, that put resources in promoting them, and we find that some of them were convicted of insurrections and things like that. Well, sedition, in the case of William Dudley Pelley, we can get a better idea on the lack of credibility that's in these stories. And I think your movie is just an excellent representation of that.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
I agree. And I mean, and your work, Adam, like over the years has just been, to me, inspirational. And I love that you've pulled in and interviewed so many people and have understood the importance of really looking into the intelligence aspect, or looking into the disinformation and misinformation, and especially, with the Bennewitz affair and things like that. I'm really excited for people to see your movie, especially right now in this kind of time where we're ramping up with all the UFO misinformation and disinformation. I think that's really, really cool. So tell us a little bit about saucers, kooks, and spooks.
So as far as the book, that journey started with a guy named Tal Levesque, who I bumped into almost 15, 20 years ago, and started communicating with this character. When he first contacted me, I didn't know who I was talking to. I was just emailed out of the blue by this fellow going by the name of Questal, and he lived nearby apparently in Mariposa, which is like 30 miles, and he was telling me all kinds of stuff, that he was working on as an advisor for UFOs hunters, an episode on underground bases, and that he was trying to develop his own paranormal series about Mariposa. And so I started looking into it, and I contacted Bill Burns, and he said, yes, he knows things. I eventually figured out, it was this Tal Levesque who'd been involved in paranormal and conspiracies and the Dulce Base story. And it turns out he was one of the key people promoting the Dulce Base story back in the day. And originally I had a chapter or an article I was working on called My Breakfast with Tal, where I sat down with him, and it's included in the book, where he's telling me all these things about encounters with reptilians and entrances to the inner earth, and once again how he claimed he was involved in revealing the Dulce Base story. And over time I started I was working on that article, but it seemed to be connecting to all these other stories in recent UFO history, going back to the 80s with Area 51 and the MJ12 documents. And so kind of this started tying these things together and seeing how they were all connected with, really they seem to go back to the Paul Bennewitz affair. And so that's kind of the background and basis of the book. And I get into a lot of depth in it, how people took the Bennewitz Affair and elements of that story and kind of created their own UFO stories at Area 51. A lot of using the same boilerplate to push out the same stories about underground bases. There were aliens in captivity. There was some type of conflict with humans at these underground bases, and they were doing experiments there, alien human hybrids, on and on. There's some secret deal with the government on it, and you'll hear these stories repeated again and again. Other people would jump on the same stories and repeat them, like Phil Schneider basically took the Dulce base story and used it for his own means. And so that's basically what's covered in the book.
And so, like with Phil Snyder, for people who don't know who he is, I know that I can see everybody in chat. I know that they all know who he is, but for those people that haven't has had as much research, done as much research in the subject, who was Phil Snyder?
Well, you gotta first let's talk about just the basics of the Dulce base story, because that's what Schneider picked up on. The claim was these papers came out called the Dulce Papers. And in it, the claim was made that a security worker at Dulce Base named Thomas Costello became aware of the experiments going on there, and there was a revolt with some of the other security workers against the reptilians, aliens who ran this base, and there was this firefight, and a bunch of humans were killed, but Thomas Costello escaped, and he apparently had videotape footage and other evidence. He got away from there, and he became a whistleblower and went into hiding and eventually just disappeared. But a lot of people took that story seriously. And as I kind of laid out in the book, I think Thomas Costello was basically a composite character that Tal Levesque, who claimed he was a security worker at underground installations. And the Costello character was a composite of Tal and also Paul Bennewitz battling the aliens. And so a few years after that story came out, Phil Schneider emerged. Some say it was John Lear that first introduced Schneider to the Dulce Base story. And so in the early 90s, Schneider, with a friend of his who put out a zine, they went out to Area 51 and got kind of involved in that scene. Hear a noise there?
Got some static.
Okay.
Sorry.
And anyway, at one point, Snyder emerged and became a pretty big star in the Patriot type lecture circuits of the time in the early 90s, basically repeating the Costello story, sort of, that he had been a geologist working for the government. He worked at these underground bases. We show some clips of him in the film. It's really compelling listening to this guy when he's talking. He's making out these pretty outrageous claims. He claimed some of his fingers had been shot off by the aliens, and he pulls off his shirt and showed a scar running down his chest where the aliens split him open, supposedly, and during this firefight. But people took him seriously and still to this day consider him another one of these great legendary whistleblowers. This is where we come to some of the FOIA documents, and Jack helped me find the FOIA document the FBI had on Phil Schneider, which really showed that he was a troubled individual with mental problems going way back. And at some point, he claimed that he had got cancer from dealing with radiation there at Area 51 or one of these sites. But what the true story seemed to be was that he got a hold of some radioactive material that somebody gave him in a bar somewhere, and he took it home and put it under his bed, and that's probably how he ended up getting cancer. But the feds found out about this because he gave some of this material to, like, I think his uncle, who was a medical doctor, and they called the feds and interviewed Schneider about that. So, you know, those materials are out there, but eventually Snyder committed suicide sometime there in the 90s, and many people, including his wife, started spreading the theory that he'd been silenced by the government, etc., because he was, this whistleblower. In a nutshell, that's the Phil Schneider story. But he's still considered like a whistleblowing legend in UFO and conspiracy circles.
So amazing to me. And you mentioned that he was on the Patriot speaking circuit.
Mm-hmm.
I have not heard about that.
Well,
Can you?
Well, that's how I'm kind of labeling it. This kind of coincided with some of the work Bill Cooper, his radio show and his lecturing. Originally, he came out in the late 80s. He kind of came to prominence as a UFO lecturer, claiming that he'd been part of, when he was with Naval Intelligence, going through briefings where it was told to him that, yeah, aliens exist. And there, once again, there's this secret treaty pact with the humans, and the government's involved in all kinds of ugly stuff with the aliens, etc.
Well, it kind of started to take on the same story that John Lear had, spreading, and with his, what was it, the John Lear hypothesis?
Yeah, basically they were spreading the same story of, once again, underground bases and on and on and on, that they basically picked up from Bennewitz. Now that kind of merged with the rise of, during the period of the militias, and the Patriot movement overlapped with a lot of these UFO type conspiracy theories. So that's what I mean, the Patriot lecture circuit. I don't know if it was officially called that, but you had, for instance, there was a famous conference that Norio Hayakawa put on during that period in the early 90s that featured some of these people like Cooper and a number of others. And there was this movement at that time at Area 51 where there was a bunch of people going out there protesting. They wanted to be allowed into Area 51 to see what was going on, and that was all part of this scene going on there. So there was that, you could call it patriot, right-wing, libertarian element overlapping with a lot of the conspiracy theories and stuff going on in ufology there. And, I had people on from either side of the political spectrum kind of coalescing, coming together. Some people have called that fusion paranoia, but that was kind of the scene back at that time.
Wow. And the hits keep on coming. I mean, but that's amazing to me. And I know Ron Regehr, I think, was, involved with all of that as well. And Chris, what are your thoughts on all of that? And what kind of, when you started really digging into this, like what alarmed you and what intrigued you?
I think definitely how the myth of what Paul Bennewitz put down, like it just kind of blossomed into all of these crazy different stories, I think, is what really drew me in first. And then Adam wrote this chapter in the book called My Breakfast with Tal, I think. It was the chapter you were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And he's just getting pummeled by all these conspiracy theories by Tal and John Rhodes. And there's a little toy choo-choo train going around their heads in the cafe that they're in. And I was just like, oh man, this is just so visual, and this just speaks to me how crazy this is. So I really, really wanted to film that scene, which we never got to, but kind of.
I mean, right away, did you just think, what in the world is going on? Or did you kind of have a stranger trip? Like, I mean, for me, there was a point in time when obviously I was a little bit more of a true believer when I didn't know better and I didn't have my bearings about me.
Yeah, I'd always been really curious about the whole UFO thing. Like, in the 90s, with like unsolved mysteries became a big thing. And um, even before that, like Bob Lazar was on like Current Affair and just all of these weird hack shows like sightings. And um, I always kind of took it with a grain of salt, but it made me really curious because like it's on TV, and if it's on TV, it's got to be true. So um, yeah, it just, I don't. Someone handed me like the Bill Cooper book, um, "Behold a Pale Horse," like when I was maybe 20, and he was like, "This is the real, this is the truth," and I'm like, "Wow, all right, I got to check this out." But yeah, it was always a form of entertainment more than like taking it really seriously. So
Well, good for you. I mean, that is good, and that's kind of my advice to everybody. And it's hard, especially right now, because there's so much out there, and you do have people not only on TV shows, but you've got people, holding congressional briefings. I mean, like doing, all of this where you're, in mainstream media for whatever that's worth. I mean, they're promoting this like it is real without any fact checking, and so now it's to the point where, okay, that might have been entertainment. But as Jason Parker is mentioning in chat, it is sad that, people are mentally ill and then they get hooked up into this. And that is a real tragedy. You're right, Jason. Thank you for your good comment.
yeah, no, I mean, now it's just everything's at this fever pitch where like everybody's a conspiracy theory. And we're all in this reality show where it's kind of like there's no consensus reality. So everything is so wacko right now that it's probably best not to believe anything. Wholeheartedly.
I like
Yeah.
your thinking on that. I mean, seriously, I have a Pilates studio, and I see people of all ages and, different backgrounds here. And I had this really amazing young woman, very, really with it and things. And she was talking about telling me that a lot of kids her age, early 20s, educated kids, think that the moon landing was fake, and I'm just like, oh my God, Kim Kardashian, like just stand on,
Mhm.
get on board that line. But it really is quite jarring that so many people have these ideas that have been mainlined,
Right.
But go ahead,
If
Jack. Sorry.
add something, please, Erica. The FOIA files that Adam mentioned, my interest in Schneider, they had me at plutonium under the bed. And the mental illness is a big part of it. And also with these FOIA records that we get on UFO people, it's rarely to never about their UFO activity. Like that's like never why the FBI is interested in them. It's virtually always because they're involved in some crazy activity that does become a public nuisance, or subversive activity, or being manipulated by subversive actors. And I think that's a big part of it too, that I'm sure we're going to get to as we get through the Bennewitz part of it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Jack. And I think that's why all of us have a lot to share about this information. And I want to go back to really quick before we kind of finish off the Bennewitz affair and things. But I noticed, like one of the things that I really like that you talk about is the fact that we were so influenced, like these myths that were put into the X-Files. And the X-Files, I mean, to me, back in the day when I was in my prime and loving the shoulder pads and big hair, I was like, I loved, like, this was so sexy. And it's like, oh my God, cattle mutilations and all of these things that really captured me. And, I loved it. And even though I knew it wasn't real, there was something when those ideas are seeded. You've got these people, Lazar over here, and all of these people doing this kind of role playing and then promoting that narrative. It is so ingrained in our culture. And so, Adam, just for a minute, talk a little bit about like that and how that really has shaped where we are right now.
Yeah, you can really point to the Bennewitz Affair, where a lot of these tropes, if you want to call them, emerged from. Um, just quickly, one key part of the Bennewitz Affair was the Myrna Hansen abduction. And briefly, she was, this was in May of 1980 is the date usually given for her abduction. She was in a town called Eagle Nest, New Mexico, near Cimarron, and she was, according to her account, abducted by aliens, beamed into a spaceship, both she and her son. She witnessed a cattle mutilation. I'm not sure if it was outside of the spaceship or on the spaceship. She went aboard the craft. There was some type of medical procedure performed on her. She broke loose at one point, started running through the ship, or it was an underground facility, not really quite clear. Later on in her, as she went under regression, she remembered being in an underground facility where she broke free and saw the classic alien hybrid babies and burbling in the vats. All this stuff, straight out of what we saw years later in the X-Files. And so that was an element of the Bennewitz Affair. But something I know Jack wanted to talk about Myrna Hansen, so I made a few notes here if you I can go through with you on it. And one interesting thing, I interviewed Greg Valdez, who is Gabe Valdez's son, who was pretty up to speed on what went on during that period. Sometimes he was a direct witness to some of the stuff going on with Bennewitz and his father, Gabe Valdez, and heard a lot of the stories that Gabe shared with him. And when we were talking about the Myrna Hansen incident, he threw it out to me one time. Well, that could have been part of the disinformation campaign as well, that they used whoever this person was. Myrna Hansen is part of the PSYOP. And at the time, I hadn't really considered that idea before, but the more I started thinking about it, the more it kind of made sense to me. What happened with that, Myrna Hansen, after she reported her initial abduction incident, she contacted the state police, the highway patrol in New Mexico. She was hysterical. They didn't know what to do with this lady, so they contacted Gabe Valdez, who already had a reputation by that time as kind of being the go-to guy for cattle mutilations and UFO and strange stuff. And Valdez, he wasn't sure what to do with this lady either, so he contacted Paul Bennewitz for some reason. At this time, Paul Bennewitz was getting knee-deep in a lot of this stuff. He had witnessed, he lived in Albuquerque and had, in December of 79, had witnessed a bunch of UFOs and started filming and photographing them, and was going out to Dulce during that period as well. Had attended a cattle mutilation conference. So all this kind of arose out of this interest a bunch of these people had, like Gabe Valdez and Paul Bennewitz, and Bill Moore got involved with what was going on there with cattle mutilations and UFO sightings in Dulce and at Kirtland Base, and how this all seemed to be connected with the Myrna Hansen affair. Bennewitz course, he saw these, reported these to Air Force security at Kirtland Air Force Base there. And that's supposedly when this disinformation operation began sometime, after December of 1979, where Richard Doty got involved. And as the story goes, they were kind of humoring Bennewitz along to make him believe that what he was seeing at Kirtland Air Force Base were alien craft, and that eventually pushed him over the edge. Now, what's interesting, last year I was watching, as we were making this film, going over some of the footage of Bill Moore at the MUFON Symposium in 1989, I believe it was, where he basically admitted his participation working with Richard Doty in this operation. From, as Moore explained it, he made a kind of deal with the devil where he would basically monitor people involved in the UFO scene like Bennewitz, and in exchange he'd get classified documents and this type of stuff. And so that kind of began the Bennewitz affair. Now, anyway, watching that MUFON conference, something stood out with me. Moore was talking about, he said the Bennewitz disinformation started in May of 1979 with the Myrna Hansen abduction, which I thought was weird. It struck me, wait a minute, that's wrong. First of all, we typically think of the Bennewitz affair starting when he contacted Air Force intelligence in December of 79. So he's saying it happened in
Let me
May
just, I don't know if it's too important, but I believe it was May 1980.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting to.
Oh,
that's what I found odd. He was saying, first of all, maybe he made a mistake saying that 1979 date, but he's also seemed to be indicating that it started with the Myrna Hansen abduction, which actually we know was in May of 1980. So that seemed a bit odd. And so Myrna Hansen is kind of like this mysterious figure in this whole thing. Was she part of the psyops? Nobody really knows what happened to her after that. Bill Moore
I tried to track her down for the film, and I maybe it was Greg Bishop said she ended up in California, or he had heard, or I got that from somewhere, and I contacted maybe 5 Myrna Hansens.
Pretty common name, yeah.
Yeah, none of them got back to me. So
right, and so
could interject, please, Adam. Yeah, that's one the reason I was interested, particularly in Myrna Hansen, was she shows up and significantly moved the proverbial ball. And the stuff she interjected into the narrative, yeah, it's still today going on. The animal experiments supposedly on UFOs, the mutilations, the vats, like you say, there's babies in vats and nurseries and stuff like that. Bud Hopkins and his whole crew of hypnotists went on to use all that stuff. And then, yeah, she's basically, just hard to tell what became of her. I know that Emily Church at Weird Reads Emily did some good work on that too.
Oh.
Yeah, and Adam contributed to some of that work Emily did, but yeah, Ms. Hansen is really a peculiar figure in this story, in my opinion. Yeah.
And if you do like a web search, I mean, Myrna Hansen is a pretty common name, but what'll come up is an actress from the 40s and 50s. So was she an actress put in this role? What happened after? So she had her abduction experience, and she ends up at Bennewitz's house, and Leo Sprinkle is called in both Bennewitz and Sprinkle were involved with APRO to conduct regression sessions with Myrna Hansen. And when people hear about these in the different books and stuff, it sounds like 2 or 3 regressions with Bennewitz, a short period of time perhaps. And that was it, where she recounted all this stuff going on. But as revealed in some of the material we lay out in the film are recordings of Bennewitz during this period that paints a much broader picture of what was going on there, that Myrna Hansen and her son, as well as Bennewitz's wife, basically lived together for an extended period of time where they were on doing these regressions. Bennewitz was getting more and more paranoid. He believed, like in Greg Bishop's book, you'll hear about how they had his Lincoln Town car, and they put foil all around it to conduct the regression sessions because they wanted to block out the aliens beaming her. But it got much crazier than that from these recordings, where Bennewitz was going on about how they're under constant harassment. He devised different types of instruments to deflect the alien beams, to contact the aliens. He claimed that on one occasion, a beam hit his wife and knocked her to the ground. It's just this insanity that was going on. And not long after that, Bennewitz kind of cracked up. And at one point, his family put him in a mental institution for a period of time. But looking at, who was Myrna Hansen, you got to look at Leo Sprinkle's role in this as well. Who one guy we interviewed was David Daniel Rydell, whose father was a famous contactee. Pat McGuire shows up in Linda Moulton Howe's Strange Harvest. And Rydell had started looking into the situation years later, what happened with his dad, and going through there's like an archive of Leo Sprinkle materials at the University of Wyoming, started finding some unsettling things about Sprinkle and his involvement with these abductees. I won't go into all of that now, but it seemed a lot of his involvement seemed pretty nefarious. And one of the things I started discovering that a lot of the abductees would use pseudonyms, basically aliases that Sprinkle would use for them, either to protect their identities or to conceal their identities. And Rydell was telling me he was going through the archives at one point, before I had talked to him, before he really knew about Myrna Hansen and all this. And he had come across a list that showed the names of some of these abductees and their pseudonyms. So there might be some information there in those archives of who Myrna Hansen really was. But like I said, she basically disappeared. There's one other odd story in all of this that's in Greg Bishop's Project Beta, and this is something that comes from Richard Doty, so take it with a big grain of salt, but it's kind of an intriguing story. Another classic feature in this story was that Myrna Hansen had an implant at the base of her skull that the aliens put in there. And so Bennewitz started working with the military, and he talks about, or the Air Force, and he talks about this in some of these tapes we've heard, how the Air Force was going to help him with the victim. They're going to get some CAT scans or x-rays to figure out what this implant was about. Now, according to Doty, they did take Myrna Hansen into an underground facility there at Kirtland. There was at one time a huge underground facility there, and he says Air Force hypnotists regressed her, and I guess why that happened, I'm not quite sure if it did happen, and that they did take these CAT scans of the implant, whatever that may have been. Doty said there was concerns because during her hypnosis sessions, Hansen had talked about an underground facility, which she believed was at Dulce, but those Doty claimed she was talking about an underground facility at Kirtland, and the Air Force was concerned about this information. And so what was going on here, were the Air Force hypnotists part of implanting memories? Is this all disinformation? But, they were definitely, according to Bennewitz, he was working with the Air Force or the government at one time, and they were, helping him with the Myrna Hansen affair. Okay. And so, yeah, she ends up disappearing, and, that's the last we heard about. But, a very strange figure in the story. The only person who claims she ever talked to Myrna Hansen after the Bennewitz affair was Krista Tilton, which is no whole nother ball of wax, but she became another Dulce base whistleblower, so to speak. And what was revealed by Barry Greenwood in recent years, they got some materials that were going back and forth between Bill Moore and Bob Pratt. I know you've done some FOIA requests on Pratt, and it was Moore's notes. And back in the early 80s, Moore claimed that he wasn't Doty's only asset that was working with him. Also, Colonel Wendell Stevens was also playing that role, who's famous in the UFO community. He was the kind of guy who discovered Billy Meyer, and he had these whole host of contactees who careers he championed, promoted one who was Krista Tilton. And so at one point, he and Krista Tilton got married, or it's not clear, or they were talking about getting married. At the same time, Wendell Stevens was in prison for a child sexual abuse offense. And so you got all these murky, strange characters. And, just talking about Tilton's role in here, she claimed she talked to Myrna Hansen. I'm dubious about that, but afterwards, after she was done with Wendell Stevens, that ended. She hooked up with one of the great researchers back in the day, Tom Adams, who did a lot of the fundamental research on cattle mutilations and black helicopters, and looked into the Dulce affair and had a wealth of knowledge and documents. Tilton ended up marrying Tom Adams, a pretty sane, sober, serious researcher, put out a newsletter called Stigma. In a short period of time, Stigma he changed the name of it to Crux, and it was kind of now his and Krista Tilton's project. And she, all of a sudden, through this newsletter promoting Tilton's abduction experiences, my lab type stories, all this wild stuff, which really seemed unexpected by friends of Tom Adams. Why that happened? They were married for a couple of years, and then he basically left ufology and research he was done, and a lot of the materials, I believe, that he developed ended up in a book Tilton put out called the Bennewitz Paper, that had a lot of good material in there with a lot of stuff that seemed like disinformation. Wendell Stevens also privately published a book, so it's like they kind of glommed on to that story, and one last thing. Greg Valdez told me that he felt, Krista Tilton was pushing disinformation about Dulce. She became kind of the go-to gal for the Dulce base story in the late 1980s. In fact, we show some footage in the film, some of that Japanese footage Chris was talking about of Krista in a helicopter flight over the Dulce area, pointing out where the alien activity was, this type of stuff. And so she became real popular on the scene. But what Greg Valdez told me, that the disinformation she was putting into the story was confusing where the actual Dulce base was. And John Lear was doing some of this too. They were confusing the name. Where there had actually been activity was at Archuleta Mesa is what it's called, that area. And what Greg Valdez suspect, he was actually on the ground where they did find some what appeared to be ventilator shaft, and this whole thing seemed connected to the maybe government's involvement with this whole cattle mutilation thing. But and so Tilta, like Lear, was one promoting an alternate location of where the Dulce base was, and so in his mind, that was part of the disinformation around this whole story, just to confuse what was actually going on at Kirtland and Dulce base, and to confuse where the actual locations were, and just basically hide what the real story was, whatever that may be. You know, I have my suspicions.
I indeed let Adam know I was particularly interested in Myrna Hansen, so I appreciate that, Adam. Thank you.
No problem.
And then let me just go back, because I know that Steve has been in chat and I don't want to ignore him just asking lots of great questions. So Steve, I apologize for not getting to all of your questions, but why did Valdez think that Myrna was a spook? Was it just a general hunch, or?
You know, I don't know if we got into a lot of depth with that. I was kind of taken aback when he told me, and I only had one discussion with him. If we would have talked again, I probably would have explored that more with him. But it seemed, from what I got out of it, from my own observations, she showed up at that opportune time to be injected into the story to push all these narratives. Once again, the cattle mutilations, underground base, experiments on human captives,
Hey, Adam.
implants, etc.
I was curious, like in the book, which is not in the film, you talk about Tal telling you about some prisoner riots and how that might have actually been like a thread of truth in the Dulce base battle underground with like genetic testing and all that. There might have been like possibly a shred of truth in there.
There's nuggets of truth or factual nuggets in all these stories, and that was one that Tal brought up to me, that I'd have to go to the book to tell you the exact story, but it was something that was reported in newspapers at the time. That
it was in 1980, I think is what I remember.
Repeat the story as
well. I think what you had written was there was some kind of prison riot, and Tal was called in the middle of the night to come guard a hole in the wall or something, and then there was like a secret passage. This was all, I guess, according to him.
Yeah,
and a bunch of like super soldiers went in there to take care of the prisoners or something. It was just this bizarre story, but
That was Tal's spin on it, but there was some actual reporting in newspapers in New Mexico having to do with a prison where a bunch of prisoners got sick somehow, and there was accounts of them being beamed with low frequencies. I mean, this was through newspaper reporting at the time. So Tal would take incidents like that and conflate them together. Like I said, he was a security guard, or he claimed to be, where he gained knowledge about the inner earth and this type of stuff and how they're connected with these underground installations. So I think some of it was partly true, that he might have been a security guard and he believed these things about underground bases. But if you look at his history, it also been involved for years and years as a fan of the whole Richard Shaver mysteries about entrances to the underground earth and these creatures called the Diros. And Tal was actually became friends with Richard Shaver. So these stories helped contribute to this Dulce base mythos. If you look at the Shaver mysteries, these Diros creatures were once again in the earth. They had this weird machinery. They were doing these experiments on humans and animals, creating hybrid. And that's the whole, a lot of the things you hear that supposedly went on at Dulce Base. So it was like a stew of all these ideas from science fiction and different conspiracy theories going around that Tal was key in taking these myths and pushing them into the new X-File generation, you know.
definitely.
And he was somebody who knew a lot of people. One guy I know has been influenced a lot by Tal was Dan Aykroyd, and we tried to get a hold of him for the film with no luck. There's a whole story there. So Tal was one of those guys who was influential to a lot of these stories, nurturing them and helping seed them, you know, into what we now know as, you know, ufology.
And so, can I just ask you, because I found it interesting, you know, you've got Richard Haynes, Dr. Richard Haynes, who enters into this narrative, and he has always been such a fascinating person to me. I would love to go through all of his files, but what was his involvement in all of this?
So Haynes was a part of that organization with Hynek and Villay, correct? Do you remember the name of that organization?
No,
They
but I
were,
bet somebody in chat does.
yeah, they were pretty prominent at the time. It was basically
Not
Hynek's.
QFOs.
That might have been it. Center for UFO
Yeah.
Studies, yeah. And they had these scientist types like Haynes and others that were part of that group. And Haynes, actually, the tapes we play in the film was Haynes getting hold of Bennewitz saying, "What's up? Tell me the story." And Bennewitz goes off telling him about Myrna Hansen, how they're being bombarded with beams, and she's an actual abductee and all that stuff. And Haynes got that on tape. And what Bennewitz was trying to get Villay and Hynek to come out there to visit them because he really wanted to spread the story. And there's some accounts. A researcher called Jim McCampbell interviewed Bennewitz, and Bennewitz said, yeah, that Hynek did visit him at one point. Bennewitz took him out on his balcony and showed him a UFO, and that Hynek told him other stuff. According to Bennewitz, Hynek told him that, yeah, there were hundreds of actual documented alien abductions of humans, this type of stuff. Whether Villay got involved too, but you know, there's the other stories that Hynek basically gave Bennewitz this computer that from the Air Force that the Bennewitz started using to talk to the aliens. And that's another odd thing too. Greg Valdez was there one time when Bennewitz was using that computer, so he saw it. The computer would generate these like very rudimentary, basic diagrams of aliens, some that looked like reptilian, and he was getting supposedly codes through this where the aliens were talking to him. I think other people listened to the codes and it sounded like gibberish, didn't mean anything to them, but Bennewitz felt the aliens were directly contacting him. So I think he asked me what Haynes' role was in that. He was kind of like an intermediary to Kufo's, basically just documenting Bennewitz's story at that point when it was ongoing.
Thank you for talking about that. And I want to just go back really quickly and ask this question because from Tanner Boyle, because I thought this was interesting, and I've heard this too. Where did Jacques Vallée's role come into that? Did he program? Was he involved with any programming of the computer that was given allegedly through Hynek to Bennewitz?
Well, one thing is interesting. I might ask Chris to help me on this if he can remember. There's a old recording of a show that Don Eckerd did with Bill Moore in the early 90s. He was talking about how this is when Moore had re-emerged briefly, and he was like he was going to spill some tea, as they say. And he said he had a contract signed by Hynek with the federal government that was going to prove something, that he was involved in maybe the Bennewitz Affair. It wasn't clear, and he name dropped Vallée, but he said if you go check out Vallée's book, I'm trying to remember what book it was. There was some clues. Do you remember that, Chris?
What I remember from that interview is he heavily insinuated that it was Vallée, but never really outright said it. That's kind of my memory.
But I remember he mentioned one of Vallée's book, and he said the clue is in the book, and you went through the book and you
right.
found just one mention of what?
Yeah, I don't remember. Was it Messengers of Deception? Maybe.
I think it was Messengers of Deception. Yes.
Yeah, I read that. I read that book a couple of times after that, just going through to try to find some kind of clue. But I don't know.
I think the basic clue there that Moore might have been pointing to was that Vallée had this expertise in developing computer programming and software, and so that's what he was alluding to.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have one of the general narratives is Paul Bennewitz lives outside Kirtland Air Force Base. He thinks UFOs and funny stuff are going on at the Air Force Base. Then Richard Doty and Bill Moore are dispatched to throw him off the trail and keep him believing in aliens, but the story gets increasingly crazy. By some accounts, NSA was even set up in the neighborhood to send signals for him to intercept and be confused about. And one of the aspects of the story is that Sacred Cow in ufology, J. Allen Hynek, gave him a computer to help him track the aliens, but unbeknownst to Bennewitz, had come from the Air Force and was designed to further confuse him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's to kind of like block the signals that he was picking up, right?
So I did some footnote chasing, and if I'm understanding right, that primarily comes from Project Beta and Greg Bishop's book. So, like, do we know any more about the source of Hynek being involved? Is that basically, and not that I'd say it to discount it, but I'm just wondering, is that a Bill Moore story or Paul Bennewitz or multiples? What's our best evidence that Hynek did that?
It seems to have come from Bill Moore, as far as I can tell.
There was a story that he had told Hynek, or Hynek had told him over cocktails one night.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
There's only one source for that. And I think I try to make that clear. That's speculation, or there's some gray area there.
Now, the things with sending signals at or beaming Bennewitz or setting up with that computer. Supposedly what was going on there at Kirtland was, they're doing a lot of dark projects. Maybe the UFOs were, early stealth technology, these type of things going on. And there was some work with satellites where they were testing these satellites that were beaming down stuff. And that's what Bennewitz started picking up on. And that's what the Air Force was concerned about it. So NSA supposedly got involved. Well, and they're trying to jam his signal, basically jam his signal with noise. And somehow the ET thing got put in there too to further confuse him. The question is always how much of a rogue agent was Doty in all of this, or how complex of a conspiracy was NSA, the Air Force, CIA? Were they all involved in this? Or was it Doty heavily pushing some of these phony documents associated with the case? And one of those was the what's called as the Aquarius document. I should talk about that for a second here. According to Bill Moore, he and Doty had this arrangement once again. Moore was going to monitor different figures in ufology, keep tabs on them, report back, and in exchange, he would get some top secret poop about UFOs that the government had, secret documents, etc. At one point, Doty showed him a teletype for something called Project Aquarius, which Moore said, as far as he could tell, was an authentic document about a secret government program. In that original teletype, there was nothing about aliens in there. But subsequently, Doty gave him another document. Looked to be that the version of that original teletype you've gotten, but Doty had altered it to inject ETs and also something called MJ12 into this document. And that he was encouraged by Doty to take that to Paul Bennewitz with the idea that Bennewitz would see it and he'd run with it to the press, talking about the secret Project Aquarius that the government's involved with, and they've made contact with aliens, and the thought being that he would wave this in front of the press and discredit himself. And so, there was that story out there, but going to like the Jim McCampbell interview recently, in recent years, I noticed something that was an odd twist to this story. McCampbell said during his interview with Bennewitz that Bennewitz told him he had, taken all these photographs of this weird shit at Kirtland and sent them with a really nice high-tech camera. I forget what the name of the camera was.
Hasselblad.
There you go. The same ones the astronauts used to film stuff on the moon. So he sent in these to be developed, and they disappeared. Stolen something. And so Of course, he was upset about that. And one day he had a visit from somebody, and he doesn't say who that somebody was, that brought him this Aquarius document. Now, in Project Beta, when Bill Moore talked about it, he had said he had taken an Aquarius document and told Bennewitz to be careful with this. I wouldn't run with this, take it with a big grain of salt. I wouldn't do anything with it, Paul, but, it's kind of up to you. He said Bennewitz at that time agreed and locked it in his safe and didn't do anything with it. But according to McCampbell, somebody approached Bennewitz on maybe it was another occasion with these Aquarius documents, and Bennewitz didn't say who this individual was, but he brought him this document, top secret classified thing, opened it up and was going through it, and it had his missing photos inside of it. And he showed them to Bennewitz and basically said, this is classified. You can't show this to anybody. So what Bennewitz was telling McCampbell was they'd stolen his photos, put them in this classified report, and said, he'd get in trouble if he shared them.
Yeah, they threatened his life.
Yeah.
Even whoever brought this Aquarius document with the photos threatened, well, you're going to kill you if you leak this. So it's like two different stories, kind of.
So there you have it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of odd stuff like that. Let me touch on one more thing about Doty. Was he a rogue agent? Whatever. Greg Valdez once again told me that Doty had gotten in trouble for leaking classified information, and was disciplined at some point. Doty said that basically Linda Moulton Howe had blown his cover in around 83 or so. The Bennewitz story was starting to come up, and he was reassigned to East Germany. And he said when he was in East Germany, that's when he got in trouble by some communications he had with foreign agents, and he was disciplined. But I think once again might be some type of cover story. What Greg Valdez thought was that he had gotten in trouble for leaking information. They basically sent him over to East Germany because he was getting too radioactive with this story and other things going on, just to get him out of Albuquerque. So if he is leaking classified stuff, what was that exactly? There's one thing with the Aquarius project. There was an actual secret project called Aquarius, but it had nothing to do with any of the Aquarius documents that came out of the Bennewitz affair. In fact, at the Black Vault Greenwald site, he found some Aquarius documents, and when I finally saw them, it was like, what the hell does this have? It was some project with the Department of Energy. But, that might have been one of the things that Doty was getting some of these code names and leaking them out, but using them in UFO stories. But one of the key things I think that he might have got busted for was, it's been claimed that he's been involved with a bunch of hoax documents, but there's the actual document, incident reports when he was at Kirtland, that he put together these incident reports claiming that there was some type of strange aircraft that landed, and there's other incidents that who saw this at Kirtland Air Force Base, other security officers. And it also mentions, without naming them in those reports, Bennewitz, Gabe Valdez, and Bill Moore. So this is like in December of 79 or so. The same things that Bennewitz were seeing. There was this classified incident report on Kirtland Base that Doty put together. Now, a year or so afterwards, Barry Greenwood they're filing a bunch of FOIAs and looking into all of this area. Somebody had, one of his colleagues had videotaped a UFO documentary that one of the affiliate stations for one of the major networks in San Francisco had put on the air, and his Greenwood's buddy had recorded that. Greenwood got a hold of it and was looking at it, and they flashed up this document real briefly that had to do with this incident report at Kirtland Base. And he was able to pause it, and he got some numbers off it. That's how they ended up filing that FOIA request, that they basically were able to get a hold of those documents of Doty's incident report. The documents they got weren't quite like the one that was shown on TV. That looked like that document had been altered a little bit too. So these were the kind of shenanigans going on. It looked, did Doty leak that to, for that guy making the UFO documentary to start to promote these stories, So that might have been one of the things that got him into hot water. And both he and Major Ernest Edwards, who was his superior, got shipped over, like I said, to East Germany. And supposedly Edwards, too, he shows up in Bennewitz had what he called the Project Beta report, and he claimed that Edwards was on hand when Bennewitz received his first communications with the aliens. As far as Ernest Edwards, Chris looked into him a little bit. I hope I'm not putting you in the spot, because you got to dredge up some memories. But we remember trying to get a hold of Ernest Edwards and talking with his wife, and what you learned?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't really remember.
I basically remembered that you got a hold of her because we were looking at, was Ernest Edwards still around? And you figured out, I guess he was deceased, but you pretty much figured out who his wife was, got a hold of her. And
Wow,
there was like a memorial page.
about this.
Yeah,
Sorry,
she talked about a bunch of his service in different areas, but what was left out was his time at Kirtland Air Force Base.
That's right. Yeah. And I have tried to get a photo of him. It was really difficult to get any kind of photo of him too, which I think I might have asked her even, and she said she couldn't do that. So.
I guess that's why you originally got a hold of. We were trying to get photos for all these characters, like photos for all of the aviary, whoever, if that was really much of a real thing. But yeah, that was part of the process of making the film. Anyway.
Yeah, we had started out like really, really big with all, I think I wanted to do like all of the chapters in your book. And then it started honing down more and more to the Bennewitz Affair, and how that I kind of wanted to make like a historical frame for how you can look at what's going on today. So, but it started out really big with like Bill Cooper and
but it got difficult because there's all these threads, and if you pull in too many, the whole just turns into, in my way thinking, convoluted, complicated, confusing mess trying to in a 2-hour or 90-minute documentary explaining the roles of everybody in this. So yeah, tried to boil it down to the essence of the important parts of the story.
Right.
Well, each of you, if you had to take a guess, we won't hold you to it. Air Force sanctioned disinformation project, or rogue agents, or just sadistic people? What was going on?
I think it's a little of everything. I mean, yeah, you probably have a better answer than that.
Nope, well, go ahead and finish your thought. But
yeah. No, that was it.
Yeah, I think Doty was running rogue on a lot of this stuff when it gets to and still we don't know 100% for sure about all these documents, the MJ12 papers, there's the Ellsworth incident, but they all seem to be connected with Doty. And really, so, you had, it gets interesting with the Bill Moore and Bob Pratt materials that were revealed by Greenwood, and I forget, last guy Sparks were involved with bringing out some of those materials. But going back as early as around 82, Moore was working with Pratt on a book that was originally nonfiction, having to do with Bennewitz and Doty, and all these stories. And Pratt argued at one point, well, we can't prove a lot of this stuff, and it turned into a fiction book that had different names, Majestic and Project Aquarius was, I think, one of the last names. And that book is actually floating around there if you look hard enough. But, so this was in like 82 or so. They put this together, 82, 83. It wasn't, and they were talking about in the book Majestic once again, and the Aquarius Project. And this was at least a year before the Majestic 12 documents finally surfaced. So they were using all this terminology and talking about these ideas prior to the release of the MJ12 documents, which basically confirmed a lot of these stories that Moore had been involved with since, back in 79, 80 with the Roswell incident, how there was a crash of a alien craft there, and they recovered bodies, etc., which became a big popular book around that time. And in essence, what the MJ12 documents supposedly did was to confirm that story, was that there was a secret government group. There was a crash at Oswald. They brought, or Oswald Roswell, that they brought. The MJ12 group they were brought together to brief Eisenhower on this and figure out how to deal with the ET subject. So Jack was asking me once again, rogue. I think Doty was going rogue on a lot of these things, like releasing how that document ended up for that TV documentary. Seems like Doty would have had access to that document. All the other hoax documents kind of point to Doty and his feeding those to Moore. I don't think
I think Adam is frozen.
Whoops. What was he just saying?
About Doty's, a lot of the hoax stuff.
Oh, right. But then there is like official documents that tie Bennewitz to the military, like Ernest Edwards. Mm-hmm. So, but that is at the very beginning, where it seems. So
yeah. He went in and briefed the military, and he was under the impression that they were going to work with him. That's what he was rolling with, to figure out what was going on there. And so the Air Force intelligence, NASA or NSA were not clear how involved they were. It seemed to me odd originally when I was looking at stories with NSA involved. Do they do that? But that appears to be kind of a standard practice. There's a lot going on at Kirtland, and he covered the Gulf Stream 6, that bunch. They were all military intelligence guys that were working under the umbrella of NSA when all of that was going on. So that doesn't seem out of the ordinary that NSA wanted to know and deter Bennewitz if he was picking up secret signals for projects there at
Yeah.
Kirtland Air Force Base. How much they were involved in these other elements of the story, if they are even true, like the computer that was sent to Bennewitz, etc.
Which
Yet we don't know.
Like Gabe does say he had a computer
Mm-hmm.
that saw things on it, but that he got that from the military. That's a different story. But
Right.
Seems to check out.
I've just got to just say, because I'm sitting here and I mean, you've got these stories, you've got the same cast of characters, where to put off, where does Bigelow, where do all these characters come in? Because obviously they're lurking behind the scenes or not so much. And they're, very active again today. I'm not sure if they've ever stopped, but can you tell us a little bit about their connection to some of these shenanigans?
Well, in the film, we take it from the Bennewitz Affair, and then it goes into how Bill Moore kind of like outed himself and the whole situation with that. And then it kind of puts the kibosh on the UFO narrative for, like a good decade almost, until the Serpo story crops up. And then you see some of the same players come up in that with like Put Off, and who was part of UFO Cover Up Live in the background, Kit Green. And then those guys are informing, they had worked for Bigelow. And so the Serpo thing brings in Open Minds, which really takes off from there, like the Open Minds Forum.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was almost like the Serpo deal was kind of like a way to just jumpstart the UFO narrative again, just because it had been out of favor for so long. So I found that aspect interesting. But and then that leads to TTSA and all of the new narrative in the 2010s and on.
And so I've got to just say, I know a lot of times we say that it's the CIA or this is our own intelligence community doing this. What are the chances that this is actually a foreign adversary that is in the middle of things? I don't think we give that enough credit. And as Jack and I have done, all of the FOIA requests and research, we've found that, this, it's kind of right there. I don't know why people don't put two and two together on with regard to this, and especially right now when we've got this big cast of characters in our government promoting the disclosure narrative, trying to undermine NASA, trying to do all of the things, and get contracts for themselves, or trying to push America or all of us to disclose information that could be potentially harmful to our national security. I mean, I find those things really intriguing, and I wish people would talk a little bit more about that, because I think some of that is really quite disturbing, to be honest. So, Jack, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Erica. Yeah, I mean, if there's a counterintelligence program to get Paul Bennewitz talking about a Dulce base and thinking there's crash saucers in the desert and things like that, well, then that means that it's like just a given that there are foreign adversaries that are watching this stuff, that it'll be beneficial to have Bennewitz and Myrna Hansen and Tilton and all of these people spouting nonsense. And I held up Adam's another one of Adam's several books during Erica saying that. A is for Adamski, because Erica and my FOIA requests indicate that the FBI's interest in the 1950s and 1960s UFO community was all about subversive activity and communist infiltration, fascist loyalists, things like that. And I very much wanted to get Adams and Christopher, you too, your thoughts on some of those things that, like, for instance, we got records on Truman Bethram, who is a self-described contactee, and the FBI had memos and reports spanning several years on him, as he was identified as being a regular attendee at the New York Saucer Information Bureau that the FBI had informants telling them was a front for subversive communists distributing talking points and things like that. This is the kind of stuff that people really familiar with the UFO phenomena will know, that people like Nick Redfern have touched on some of this in the past. And also the FBI records showed that when Truman Bethram was supposed to go to Cincinnati and this was in the 1950s, was supposed to have a speaking engagement, the FBI also had an informant in his circles there. And the informant was advising the Bureau that the people scheduling and coordinating the appearance were another contactee named George Hunt Williamson, as well as another man that called himself a man speaker that worked for a magazine called Valor. And the FBI was already familiar with this magazine because it was operated by William Dudley Pelley, who they had already rolled up for sedition, and he had done 7 years of a 15-year sentence. And I think an important aspect of that is one of Pelley's conditions of parole was that he stopped political writing and distributing political material. So it's kind of easy to surmise that he decided that contactees and UFOs and blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic aliens would be a good way to transition without breaking the terms of his parole. So that was one of the things we had going there in our FOIA requests. And I did want to get either or both of your thoughts on Bethram, George Hunt Williamson, William Dudley Pelley's involvement with promoting the contactee phenomena, and any thoughts that come to mind on what I laid out there.
Yeah, Williamson was an interesting character for sure. My friend Dr. Richard Spence has done quite a bit of research and written some papers, and I kind of reviewed some of those before the show. But Spence seems to suspect that Williamson's role in ufology was similar to, what we were talking about, Wendell Stevens and Bill Moore, that he was kind of monitoring all these people in ufology perhaps and reporting back on them to somebody. He background on the guy, he had some he was in the Air Force for a bit and had a long he's involved with Civil Air Patrol for many, many years during the flaps in the like 40s with Kenneth Arnold and Roswell and all of that. A lot of the Civil Air Patrol groups around the country were investigating UFO sightings, so there's kind of that connection with Williamson. But he was kind of a self-styled anthropologist at first. He visited a bunch of Native American tribes, was deeply involved in that, though he really had no academic credentials. And later, what's his name, Jim Moseley, found out that he was faking some of his academic credentials. But Williamson first popped up with George Adamski. And at that time, Adamski had gotten a bit of a reputation by taking photographs of UFOs, which were probably fake, but whatever. He made a name for himself, was lecturing. Williamson had a buddy called by the name of Alfred Bailey, and them and Bailey and Williamson and their wives were with Adamski when he made contact with Orthon, the blonde-haired Nordic alien that really made Adamski famous. They were all in a group that's out in the California desert, and they saw a mothership. And as the story goes, and Adamski pointed it, and he drove out and met Orthon. The rest of them didn't go for some reason. But after his contact with Orthon, Williamson took a plaster cast of Orthon's boot, which was later used as evidence. There was some type of calligraphy or writing on there that showed something, or what it proved something supposedly. But so there was that contact with Adamski, and Williamson and some of his buddies formed a group around Adamski called for a while the George Adamski Foundation, to promote his career. And a couple of those characters are named Carl Hunrath and Wilbur Wilkerson, and they were they came from Wisconsin. They were electronic engineers. This Hunrath character had this like free energy device called the Bosco that's apparently could call down UFOs, or it replicated the magnetic field of a UFO. I don't know how these things work. That was his claim. So he went out to California, where he hooked up with Adamski and Williamson and these characters. And they were with Adamski one night where Hunrath was explaining his creation, Bosco, which is kind of a weird name for this device, but they were going to call down a UFO, and it might make the UFO crash. And Adamski supposedly had concerns that they could take down aircraft. And Hunrath was quoted as saying, "I don't care about that. We want the saucers." And they had a falling out at that point. And Adamski supposedly kicked them out. And the FBI, they reported these guys to the FBI and the Air Force, and basically Adamski ratted them out. So there was a break at that point. Williamson and those guys went off and kind of had a group there in LA where they were channeling ETs, getting pretty deeply into this, but they used ET names, or they believed they were ETs. And there's reports of them through Williamson's connections with, working with Native Americans and that culture, that they were using psychedelics at that point, mushrooms, peyote, that were helping to enhance their communications with the aliens. Anyway, Hunrath and Wilkerson got in an airplane that they rented from Gardena Valley Airport during this period, and were going to fly off to meet the aliens, and they disappeared. Were never seen again. There was big stories on them in the LA newspapers at the time, how they went and talked to the wife and looked at the apartment that Wilkerson and Hunrath were living in, where they had all these channeled communications hanging on the walls. But these guys were never seen again. They never found the plane they flew in. Moseley suspected that they might have got in trouble with the law and flew to Mexico. So whether they crashed in Mexico or whatever, but Wilkinson had all these odd associations. After that, he and his buddy Alfred Bailey were in Winslow, Arizona, where they devised this device like a Ouija board where they contacted the aliens. The aliens told them to start using shortwave radio equipment. Another guy came in the picture called Lyman Streeter, and they made contact with the ETs supposedly using these shortwave equipment, but they're also close to a military base, which Spence points out. So it might have been, could have been one of these Bennewitz situations, but that's just a theory of Spence. But just kind of wrap this up. Williamson had all these connections. He was connected with Charles Lawhead and Lillian. They were part of the Seekers cult, that were involved with the psychic Dorothy Martin. The sociologist wrote the book When Prophecy Fails about that cult. And she was involved with, they were involved with Williamson. And there was a connection there with Williamson, provided channel material to through the Lawheads to Andrea Puharich, who involved in some of this stuff with psychedelic drugs. And he had worked for the CIA. Some people looked like a lot of the stuff he was doing during that period was MK Ultra like. So there was a connection with Williamson there. And Williamson ended up, Dorothy Martin, who was involved with the Seekers cult, changed her name to Sister Thedra. And she and Williamson went off with another group to South and Central America, where they set up a kind of cult UFO church called the Abbey of the Seven Rays that eventually fizzled out over time. But I'm talking about all these crazy stories about this guy because it seemed if that was his role to infiltrate, and I didn't even mention Paley and his connection there. It was after he split from Adamski that Williamson ended up with William Dudley Paley in Indiana. Now he's in Indiana working on his magazine Valor that's you had mentioned before. But once again, it was a short period. I've looked at you can find some of those issues of Valor posted online. I never did quite find anything written by Williamson, but he might have been using a pseudonym or something. But once again, a short period of time, Williamson seemed to be bouncing around to all these various contactees and groups. From Spence's perspective, it seemed like, there might have been a possibility that's what Williamson was up to, monitoring all these UFO people during that period, including, you mentioned, Truman Bethlehem.
Interesting. Any thoughts on that, Christopher?
Oh, well, I was curious, Adam. Was this before or after Paley was in prison that he started mingling with the UFOs deal?
Well, it was after prison, as Jack was saying. That was part of the agreement. He couldn't write about, couldn't start any more insurrections. Quit promoting this pro-Nazi stuff, and that's where it kind of switched to this New Agey UFO Ascended Masters stuff. But Paley'd been involved in those worlds for quite a while, even before he became, the leader of the Silver Shirts or whatever that group was. He claimed communications with Sirius way back when he was in Hollywood. He was kind of a screenwriter during that time, and they were promoting, like Damsky was, and a lot of these others, this Nordic race of benevolent, Aryan-looking dudes. And in some of Williamson's writings, he talked about two groups. There was the good guys and the bad guys. There was the Nordic benevolent space brothers, and then there was this other serpent race, they call them, which kind of, that goes into the Dulce stories. Pick up on Bill Moore's writing. He seemed to be going there. There's these...
Yeah, or even the Darrow and the Tarot, right?
Yeah, exactly. Moore had when he came out with his book, he had these. I don't think he included the drawings in his book, but found them elsewhere, that he depicted the aliens as these big-nosed creatures. And, he's also promoting the protocols of Zion in his book. So there seemed to be this linking the serpent race with Jews. There's an anti-Semitic spin to this. Kind of the same thing with David Icke and the reptilians. They have their, from the elite, the blood of the elites, these families, and they shape shift into reptilians, and these reptilian race, they're at Dulce, and they drink the body fluids, the bloods of children. That was one of the Dulce-based story. It kind of reflects the whole blood libel stories about, the Jews supposedly did that in their rituals. So a lot of these things, the same thing with you look at depiction of the Deros. They were these big-nosed guys, and they were abducting people above ground, and they're sexual deviants, and similar to a lot of the stories that are going around conspiracy circles even to this day.
How about you, Erica? What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think my thoughts are just, all of this is just so right there. Like, nobody even tries to hide it. And yet, to me, to see, now looking at some of these, social media groups that pop up that are funded by people that aren't in this country, when you look, and I mean, just all these crazy, roads lead back to the ancient builders, and, all of this wisdom that white men seem to be privy to. And it's really fascinating to see how there always has been this element to this, which is really overt. I mean, like you're saying, it's benevolent, blonde-haired, blue-eyed space beings that are here to save the planet. And at what point do we not get where that's coming from? Like, it boggles my mind. It truly does. But
Yes,
I was gonna say
Pelly, not Aura Reigns. Yeah.
Say that again. I think I walked on you, Jack.
I'm sorry, I walked you. I said, suffice it to say, the FBI memos are about William Dudley Pelly, not Aura Reigns.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought. I was going to. Anyway.
But that whole crew that you're talking about, with the underground reptilians and the Shaver mystery that gave birth to Dulce and so on and so forth, to some extent, at least it stood on its shoulders. Yeah, my research at newspapers.com indicates that they worked the same circuit. Ray Palmer and the Pulp Mags, and George Hunt Williamson, Truman Bethram, and Donald Kehoe, even though he talked publicly about he's not on board with the contactees, he sure didn't seem to mind sharing a stage with them. And that makes me quite suspicious about the Pelly, Charles Lindbergh affiliations and really going on there, or at a minimum, that was not a disqualifier to being in those circles. You know, anything sharing those political views and those ideologies was considered a good trait to have you be at our events about the aliens and the motherships and the cow mutilations and all that.
What I was going to mention was with Williamson. Yeah, he was also one of the initial early promoters of the ancient astronauts theme, so it's all tied together, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It really is. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I love, and that's one of the reasons I love like working with Jack, because we can go, dig into this stuff, and Jack does this brilliant work with the FOIA or records requests, grammar requests locally, and just dig into this. And it's like it is when you find the documentation, it's just all right there. And as much as some people can say, even the people that have been researching this for a long time, you'll talk about this. Well, what about this aspect? What about Kehoe being a racist? What about interjecting A, B, C, and D, and potentially foreign adversaries sticking their nose into things, or private contractors? And it's like people are so black and white. It's either they're believing in aliens, or they're debunking like a UFO sighting, yes or no, but they don't want to look at the deeper aspects that all three of you have looked into. And to me, I've never understood that, because that's the most fascinating and intriguing, but also alarming kind of aspect to this topic. But thank you for letting me go off on that, because to me, I get very passionate about that. Clearly.
We just yesterday we were notified, we being Expanding Frontiers, Erica and I, were notified by the National Archives that a request we did a while back has been processed, and they just wanted fee for it, and it should be forthcoming in the next few weeks now, on a woman named Lois Jessup. And we had looked for records on her because she was a key member at that New York Saucer Information Bureau. And our research, so we're looking forward to getting that. But kind of a wider picture here, she and a lot of the contactees and several people at the Saucer Information Bureau and their informants are mentioned in a 400-something page file on a man named Robert Stark that we really don't know a lot about yet, or why the Bureau was looking into him, or how it tied in to the informants and the Saucer Information Bureau. But we're betting it's a pretty interesting story. and we're also, we have discovered that Mr. Stark worked for a while with a Russian immigrant who was very successful in the New York area in distributing televisions and entertainment equipment. And so that's probably not coincidental either. And it's hard to tell. Like Adam and Erica, like y'all have been saying, was Williamson a white hat or a black hat? I don't know. It probably depends on who you ask. And it's hard to get that definitive answer.
Well, and the FBI through the ages have been monitoring all kinds of groups, from either side of the political spectrum. So, of course, they'd want to know what Paley was up to at that time. But also, there was some people were concerned that there was communists involved in ufology, like Walter Winchell ratted out Ray Palmer because he felt that some of the stuff he was publishing or saying was questioning the U.S. government. And these guys are talking about a universal brotherhood. Is there some type of commie influence going on here? I wanted to mention, according to Doty, and once again, a grain of salt, and he said this on a couple of occasions, that what brought Bill Moore to his attention didn't have anything to do with aliens or ETs or flying saucers, but that Moore was in contact with different Russian, people in the Soviet Union that really brought him to their attention. They were curious what these communications were. These were people maybe in the government or journalists in the Soviet Union that were involved in writing about researching UFOs, but it was more, important, according to Doty, what were all the conversations he was having with these guys. And what's interesting with UFO Cover Up Live, which came out in '89 or so, it was like that was the end of the Moore's involvement in all these stories. Bennewitz and MJ12 culminated in that live video or live TV presentation of UFO Cover Up Live, and it was billed as a basically a project they were doing with Russia. So there was live speakers in the Soviet Union talking during that presentation too. And so it was, they billed as the first time there'd been some live television broadcast from the Soviet Union, which is pretty weird. This was before the wall had fallen, It was like, I'm sure our intelligence agencies were wondering what the hell was going on with it. And it was just an odd thing when these two Russian guys spoke during the show. They never really identified who the heck they were. I'm assuming they were Bill Moore's contacts. So there was that weird angle in the with Bill Moore and his Russian contacts. And during that same period in the late '80s, there appeared to be a good amount of disinformation or weird UFO stories coming out of Russia too at that time.
Oh, there was some really good ones. Yeah. There was the crash saucer, there was metametals, and all sorts of cool stuff coming out of Russia during that time.
Yeah, there were. And I've come to really appreciate the title Saucer, Spooks and Kooks. The more time has passed, because like when we say, well, what would make us think that Williamson either Russian spy or this or that, or a charlatan, and it's kind of like the belief and walking around, and so it does come to like, was it saucers? Was it spooks? Kooks? Like that's pretty much your options there. And at the risk of insulting people with a remark like that, it's not necessarily even my opinion, much as I feel like I've observed from reading FOIA records. They're just not even entertaining that it's daily. It's like if somebody's talking about being abducted on a UFO, well, then they're either mistaken or intentionally lying, or they're lying for the reason of some subversive purpose. Is pretty much, at least until recent years, I don't know what the FBI is doing now, that used to pretty much be saucer, spook, or kook, and what saucer mean. So I've come to really appreciate not just your work, but the name.
I have to give a little credit to my late friend David Perkins, who's in the film, passed away not too long ago. He was helping me when I was writing the book, and I thought I was almost done at one point, and I contacted David, and he started sharing all this information. So the process went on for another year, and I had these different titles. One of them was called Deconstructing Dulce, and anyway, hadn't really decided on a title. And within the book itself, I had used that line, Spooks and Kooks, and he said, you got to use that for the title, and that developed into Saucer, Spooks and Kooks. So David, wherever you are, thank you for that.
Yeah, he had a great sense of humor about all of this stuff. That was really special.
Are you muted, Erica?
We're still not hearing you.
Okay, my mic is being very naughty.
There
And
you
that
go.
wasn't me, actually. Seventh sign of the apocalypse. I will blame that on my electronic whatever. But I was just going to say, I love the title. I think that David Perkins, you know, that story is wonderful. I really did like David a lot, and I can't wait for people to be able to see your work. Both of you have done an exceptional job, and it's fascinating to know that it's been 3 years since you first started doing this, and you've been all over interviewing people and putting things together and creating this incredibly intriguing and important story. In my opinion, I just think it's fascinating, and the way that you've captured the characters. I mean, all of us, you know, the people that you've got in the movie. And again, I just have to say I'm very privileged to be a part of that. But just the way you lay things out and the way you make people, you know, question the narrative, I think that is really, really critical. And I can't wait to get people's opinions when it comes out. So
Awesome. Thank you, Erica, for being
Yeah.
in the film and having us
Thanks.
on and everything.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
thanks for your contribution to the film.
Yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
very honored. It was really fun, and it's fun to see it just take shape. And I love working with all of you. And I just have to say that because we've gone through, like, I know each of us has gone through our own journey in this, and we've met some really interesting people and had experiences that most people wouldn't even believe, honestly. And it's so fun, and for me, after meeting some really shady characters, but to have people like you that I know and that I can, you know, look to for information and to ground myself sometimes, that's been a really, really cool thing for me. So thank you as a person and as a researcher for that contribution as well.
Thank you.
Yes, and I will let you boys go for the evening, but we'll keep everybody posted. And I want to just say the chat has been really off the hook tonight. I love,
Oh,
like,
cool.
everybody in here has been very just respectful and had really, 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 really good comments. And so I apologize, Steve, for not asking all the questions that you threw at us. But I look forward to having all of you guys on again. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to have Jeff Knox on, who was in chat tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about UFO stories and lore and his trip to Area 51 and all sorts of things. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you both. Thank you, Jack. And I will
Thank
let
you.
all of you guys go have a wonderful, fun evening and weekend. And I also want to just take a second to thank all of my listeners on UFO Classified. And I want to direct you to expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Please check out the work that I do with Jack Brewer. Jack is an incredible research partner. I'm very proud of what we've done for the past 3 years. So please go over to Expanding Frontiers Research, check it out, share with people, and we will keep you posted on what we're up to. Because usually we're up to, I'd like to say no good, but it's kind of fun, and that's a little spicy too. So anyway, boys, have a wonderful night, and thanks you guys for tuning
Me
in.
too.
Okay, we will
Good
catch you
night.
guys. Bye. Good night, and congratulations and best of luck.
Thank you.
Guys.